Hello, and welcome to the Borealis Experience. I'm your host, Aurora, and I'm very excited to be posting this interview today with Jeremy Devens. Jeremy has a yoga podcast called the Quietmind Yoga Podcast, and he also has an astrology podcast about Vedic astrology. Make sure to check it out. He's a huge inspiration for me, and his podcast helped me through that very long and COVID-influenced winter. He is so much in my life that we, in my family, we have a term when we say, do you want to do it, Jeremy? It means, do you want to do a yoga session, a meditation with Jeremy? Because I see you struggling and I know this will make you feel better. He has an incredible story. He was born into poverty and crime and is now rising up to be an inspiring role model and leader. So I'm very honored to have him here on my show today and to share his story with you. I hope you enjoy this interview. And feel free to share or send a comment or a review. And we will be excited and happy to answer all the questions you have. Welcome on the Borealis Experience Show, Jeremy Devens.
Yeah, well, thank you. I really appreciate that intro. So yes, I host the Quietmind Yoga Podcast and the Quietmind Astrology Podcast. Those are separate, and there's yoga practices on the yoga podcast, and then astrology insights and horoscopes on the astrology one. And it's Vedic astrology, which is from the same source text of the Vedas as yoga teachings. And a lot of what I teach now is very much from that tradition and path, because it's so helpful in my life. And I've had a really sort of interesting life, I guess I could say. I think everyone could say that, but I had a very difficult childhood, no father, and very unusual upbringing. And it led me to ask a lot of questions and try a lot of different things. And then I end up finding yoga at a relatively young age, in my early 20s. So there's a lot of things I could touch on, but I'm curious if there's anything in particular you'd want me to focus on. Maybe this finding your true self, your knowing yourself, like you talk about in your podcast, understanding yourself better, things like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And most of my listeners are men. And okay. I feel like it'd be very interesting to hear how you started your healing journey, because I think a lot of the time, like, it's good to have guidance and it's good to hear the story of someone who went through stuff and then how they helped themselves. We talk a lot about counseling, but sometimes a counselor is kind of from an above perspective, and they sometimes didn't go through stuff. So on my podcast, we share stories where we can relate, and you go as deep as you want to go for people to understand what you went through. So your healing journey and to share that would be so incredibly valuable.
Yeah, for sure. So the first thing of noteworthiness is growing up without a father, it was very sort of unclear of who I am or what I'm here, or going to school and everybody's talking about their dad and their family, and I didn't have that. So I felt outcast and different, and I think we all feel outcast in different ways, and are all kind of seeking to understand ourselves better. But that was, for me, I just kind of got used to it, though. I felt like, okay, well, that's just the way my life is, and that's okay, and can't change that. And we actually did several blood tests with different men, and it wasn't those guys. And my mom had a really rough, wild life as a young person. She had me when she was 20. I was her fourth kid, the only one that she kept. So the other ones were adopted out. So it's very unusual and sort of chaotic. And we moved all the time. And were different men around. So I didn't really have any like masculine role models or men to look up to. I had a couple uncles who were criminals. They were in and out of jail all the time and stealing and doing drugs. And it was just very chaotic. We lived above a bar in inner city, and there was shootings outside of my window. Like there was violence around. And so my mom was a bartender, and I was around the bars and the gangs there in the inner city of Minneapolis, growing up there. And she wouldn't let me go outside. So I just stayed inside all the time. And that was actually good, because I probably would have gotten into a lot of trouble. One of my friends actually got shot at a young age. So it's good that I stayed inside. And that kind of led me into a more meditative way of approaching everything. So having to be isolated, having to be internal, almost in a confinement in a way, in solitary, which is what meditation is, really. It's like a chosen sort of solitude. So I basically had to be alone. And, I got into like video games and movies and TV, like any kid, but I spent a lot of time alone, and I got to kind of sit with my thoughts a lot. And I think that led me to being interested in meditation and yoga and the spiritual path. And eventually I was flipping through public access TV, and there was some guy doing Qigong. I didn't know it was Qigong, but that's what he was doing on TV. And he's just like standing there, with his cheap camera and doing some movements, and he's talking about energy. You can feel energy in your body. So I was like making fun of it with my friend, but then I saw it again like another day, and I just tried it myself. And I was like, oh my God, I could feel the energy. I felt something. And he said, feel this in your stomach. I could feel it. So I got really interested in finding that, it's hard to figure out when that show was on. So I only found it a couple times on public access. But it sort of sparked my curiosity. Like there is something more than just, the everyday life that I was living in. That's when I was early teens. So I got curious about meditation and eventually found Alan Watts. Have you heard of Alan Watts?
Yes.
Yeah. It's great philosopher, teacher, writer, the 60s, 70s or so. And I eventually found like all of his audio. I could find hundreds of hours of stuff and listen to all of it over and over again. And that was like my first sort of father figure really in my life. I had my uncles who taught me how to steal. So I was stealing things when I was young. And my mom was like, what are you doing? Like, why are you stealing? I was like, well, the only men in my life are thieves. So that's what men do, right? So I got in a lot of trouble for that and realized like, well, that's not really what I want to be doing. And fortunately I didn't get into drugs, so dodged a bullet there. But I did get really into meditation and like this sort of spiritual path at a pretty young age, and realized ultimately that like, any reason that we can take drugs, or any reason that drugs could affect us, is because they're affecting our neurochemistry, what's happening in our brains. It's like the drugs are just stimulating something that's already in our brains that I think we can access with breathing techniques or meditation techniques. So I started exploring that stuff, and Alan Watts kind of talked about some of this stuff, and he just had a really interesting view of the world. And so I got really into that. And then I just kept going, like, well, he starts talking about yoga. So I was like, okay, well, I'll check out yoga then. So I was doing the meditation as best I could, and like finding like some guided meditations. But then he mentioned yoga. So I started to seek out a yoga class, and eventually found one at my gym that I was going to, but it was all women. So I was like, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe it's actually just a women's only thing. I don't know. So I eventually found it wasn't just for women, and tried it and loved it. And it was like meditation and movement together. So I felt like I found this thing that I was looking for, because it was having this way of being present and being embodied and being with myself that wasn't so negative. Because a lot of times when I was with myself before, I got really into like dark, heavy music and really moody stuff. So I was kind of in a depressed state for a few years before that. And the embodiment of yoga really got me out of that. So this is kind of, getting me up to my early 20s, and I wanted to keep doing yoga more. So I tried that yoga class. It felt really profound and really important, and like something I wanted to do every day, even though it was very much outside of my norm, not cool. Like all my friends that I had in high school were getting into drinking and drugs and partying all the time. And it was like this split in my life where it's like, I didn't want to do that because I saw that growing up. And so I just basically went out on my own and didn't really have any friends for a while. And it was just like doing yoga things and meditation things and Alan Watts stuff and listening to that all the time. And I was just working jobs for money at the time, but I was mainly trying to be a musician. That was my main focus in music. And that was a way of expressing myself, but it was all kind of filtered through this ego lens of like, it should look this way, or I should, like, the music should be this way. I should have this success. I'm this age now. Like, what did these people do when they were my age? So there's a lot of ego wrapped up in it. And eventually I read this book by Alex Gray, the painter. Do you know Alex Gray? You heard of him?
I've heard of him, yes.
Yeah. So he's like a psychedelic painter. He's done all the artwork for the Tool albums, the band Tool. And he tries to transmit this like mystical experience, this meditative experience through his art. And he has a book called The Mission of Art. And I read that, and that really stood out to me. And he talks about this idea of egocide instead of suicide, egocide. So I was in this depressive state, and I was like looking at all this stuff, like, why are we here? What's the point? Like, who am I? And trying to understand myself and my life, and was very down for a while. But then I read his idea of egocide. It really stood out to me because he talks about how there's a certain amount of people every year jump off the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco and try to kill themselves. And some of them survive, some of them don't. But the ones who survive, in the research they've done on them, most of them, you think, well, maybe they try to kill themselves again and they're successful that time. But a lot of them, from the studies that they found, actually survived the jump, and then they feel like a part of them died rather than actually dying. Like, they realize, well, if I'm willing to do that, if I'm willing to give up everything and just end it all, then everything else now is a bonus. It's just extra. It's like, I can do anything. Like, if I'm willing to just end it, why not just quit my job that I don't like, or leave this situation I'm not happy in? And they essentially killed their ego and moved on. And that's what I did in my life. Is my identity was musician, cool, dark, brooding, mysterious guy, whatever. And I just dropped all that and just got really into things that I actually enjoyed, which was the yoga and meditation, and left it was a difficult decision, but the main person I was making music with, we were in this, it always felt darker and heavier when we were working together. And it felt more like I was going down in this darker place I didn't want to really be in. So I just trusted, like, okay, well, I'm going to go towards what really lights me up and what I really feel like is in alignment. And I knew for sure it was just doing yoga every day and meditating every day. And that was the first step. And then it was my diet and my habits and my sleep, and and then moving out of Minneapolis. I didn't like the cold weather, and moving to Texas where it's warmer. And so it was just like this step by step of like, noticing what feels like it's in alignment and what I actually want, and what's not in alignment anymore. And kept doing the things that were in alignment. And it started with just one thing for sure for me was, the yoga. But before that, it was Alan Watts. And before that, it was meditation. And so now at this point, I feel like most of my life is in that integrity of like, if something feels out of integrity, I can say, no, that doesn't feel right. I need to change that. But for a long time, I did just kind of work jobs to make money and just kind of get by. And all I had was my yoga practice that felt in alignment. And then little food choices, little health choices, little lifestyle choices. And then that eventually led to a yoga teacher training, which completely changed my life. And then that teacher was also an astrologer. So astrology learning, I did an apprenticeship with him. and just kept studying and just basically was on a 10-year run of just constantly doing trainings and learning and going to retreats and reading books and having lots of experiences being deeply involved in communities that are centered around yoga and meditation and spiritual communities. And Min's work as well in the Mankind Project was really helpful. It's basically, I decided to just try everything because everything was extra. So I willing to kill my ego of rock star, whatever. Trent Reznor was a big influence, like the really dark, moody rock music, Kurt Cobain kind of stuff, Radiohead, like that was those were my father figures for a while, but it was making me more and more depressed and not feeling like myself. So I killed all of that. Instead of actual suicide, I had the ego side, and chose to just do what actually felt in alignment. And, doing yoga 12 years ago was definitely not cool and for men. And I was usually the only guy in the class. And for years, I was usually the only guy in the class. And, now it's a lot more normal, but it's like, I didn't care about that. I didn't care about, what anyone thought of me or what it looked like, but I was there for my healing. And, yoga got me in my body, got me to get into these deep meditative states of presence and self-awareness. And, you just start to notice all these patterns, everything that's out of alignment, and you just start to see like, okay, that's not working, and change it. And so that's kind of been my process until, where I'm at now is kind of where I wanted to be the whole time, of where I feel like I'm just doing the work I really enjoy and fortunate to get to help people. And that was like the ultimate conclusion of all of that. There's a few things. So number one is like life can either be a tragedy or a comedy. And for a long time, it was a tragedy. And then I decided with the ego side that it would be a comedy. And I would not care what people thought and just do what felt right. And, and as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, And then the second thing was the MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. quote that stuck with me when I was in that depressive state of, he says, life's most pressing and urgent question is, what are you doing to help other people? And my whole thing at that point was just trying to succeed as a musician. And I wasn't really helping anybody. It was just this trying to uphold this image in my head. So I switched to helping. And even if it's just one person, even if I teach yoga class and nobody comes or one person comes, I just decided I'm going to try to help people like my teachers helped me, because doing the yoga practices and the training was by far the best thing I've ever done for myself, and so life-changing. And I'm a high school dropout. I had no money growing up, no family to support me. And the first thing I ever completed was my yoga teacher training. And I felt like that was the thing I'd been looking for, is like understanding philosophy, anatomy, spirituality, meditation, all the things are included in there. So I just really stayed on that path since then, and it just continued to deepen and expand. I feel like I'm still learning things all the time because there's so much depth to it. And I was just kind of looking for that my whole life. And now I feel like I'm living in alignment with that. And I'm really grateful for that. So I hope that's a helpful long answer.
Yes, that was such a in-depth answer and so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all this. It must have been a very lonely path and a hard path at times, but like you said, it was so worth it. It was so worth to let everything go, let your ego go. I can recall Eckhart Tolle, heard of him?
Yes.
He went through a similar experience, and now you kind of flipped around your whole life experience and are sharing with other people and helping them and inspiring them. It is so incredible to me to hear your story and to feel and imagine how you have felt when you were growing up, and to know now, when I look at you, when I listen to your podcast, I just think he's like the role model that if I had children one day, I want to let them know this is the direction we want to go, right? This is, and so from not having any like inspiration and to living like growing up in darkness, you created your own world. You probably have friends now that feel like family and support, and everything you needed back then as a child you have now, and is because you were willing to walk through that loneliness and yeah, show your true self.
Thank you.
So yeah, incredibly grateful. I cannot stop saying that. When it comes to astrology, I know for a lot of guys, they're gonna probably switch off the episode now, but I want to talk about it because I feel more and more people are interested in it. Because you either believe in it or not, but it can teach you again a lot about yourself. What were the experiences for you that you've made? Was it in magazines or a podcast, or when was astrology starting to change you and change who, like how you see yourself?
Yeah. So there was a couple of significant things with that. The first is that when I was growing up, and this is just a sort of paranormal weird story, and I'm not a very paranormal person at all, but my mom and my stepdad were playing with a Ouija board when I was like 8 or 9. And they said, if you're here, give us a sign. You know, they're asking all those questions, and then finally they say, okay, give us a sign if this is real. And all the power went out in the whole block. And so as like a 8-year-old kid, I was like, what? You know, like maybe it's just a coincidence, you know, whatever. But like that sort of sparked my imagination of like trying to understand, like maybe there's more to life than just, you know, physical, practical reality. And, you know, having a difficult childhood, I think a lot of people who have like traumatic, difficult childhoods, they look outside of the you know, like I didn't have the mom, dad, family unit thing. So you have to think outside the box. You have to look outside of what's normal and expected. So you get curious about things that are more esoteric. And that's what I did. And so I was always curious about astrology and paranormal stuff, but I just stopped focusing on the paranormal stuff. And I kind of followed astrology loosely, even from a childhood. But it wasn't until doing the yoga training and then working with my teacher. His name is Matab Benton. He's written a few books about yoga things, including the book called Astrology Yoga. So he was my teacher for my yoga training, but also he was an astrologer. And I heard people had amazing experiences. Like people were just raving about his readings. So I scheduled one and eventually did that. And again, I was still very poor. So it took me about a year to finally pay for this like $80 reading. That's how, and like doing the teacher training, I had to do like this work trade to pay for that. So there was, you know, still very poor at this point, and like 12 years ago or so. And I got a reading with him, and he basically told me my whole life. Like he didn't actually know me. Like I knew him as a teacher, but like looking at my birth chart, he knew like I didn't have my father. He knew like all these things about my life that are very specific, and like specific dates. And like there was a certain turning point in 2008 for me, and you can see that date on my Vedic astrology chart. This is different than Western astrology. Western astrology doesn't have these time periods in that same way. It doesn't have a lot of the same ways of going really deep like this. So this is the Vedic astrology that he taught, and that's been used in India for thousands of years. And that reading, it really stuck with me and changed the trajectory of my life significantly. Like I was like, yoga was great. Like, okay, I know this is good. But then the astrology stuff is like, how did he see that? How does he know this stuff? I'm like, so what is it about astrology that can do this? And so I got really curious, and I did an apprenticeship with him and learned as much as I could about it, and didn't think I'd ever have my own work doing that or teaching it, because it's so complex and so rich and deep. But eventually it came to the point of like, I realized, I want to help a former version of myself. That's kind of where I'm at now, is like everything I'm doing now is the things I wish existed 12 years ago. And it was so much harder to find so many things, even just 10, 15 years ago. And now with the internet, everything is so easy, and the podcast. So my Vedic Astrology podcast was the first Vedic Astrology podcast. And now there's a few, but I created it because the stuff was confusing and difficult to learn, and like there weren't good websites at the time. So I created that. And ultimately, I think it's one of the most empowering tools for self-awareness and self-realization, and so validating to see. It's like, okay, loss of father is in my chart. And I kind of tried to test it and tried to find him and did everything I could. I even worked with an FBI agent who has like records on everybody, and he couldn't find him. So I just that was one of the ways where I just sort of surrendered of like, okay, like there's some truth in this chart. There's things we can control. There's always things we can control and choose how to respond to life. But there are some things that are bigger than us. Like I didn't choose to be born, and I probably won't consciously choose when I die. But there's a lot of choice in between. But a lot of things, like I don't get to choose who's going to, show up to my classes, or, who I'm going to interact with all the time. So astrology gives us some of that perspective on those bigger universal things playing out, these karmas that are playing out of like, yeah, on this date, something big is going to happen related to X, Y, and Z. And now I can sort of understand it a little more, maybe prepare for it. But ultimately, it's just a sort of, as Einstein would say, like he would say, I want to know how God thinks. And I think that's what astrology is for me. It's like, I want to know how the universe is creating and understand it a little bit. I don't think I'll ever understand it fully at all, but at least have a hint of like, okay, there's some patterns here that I can learn from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Such a powerful part of your life now, and you make people interested in it. You make it very engaging. Like the first time I listened to it, my boyfriend was in the room, and like I didn't know him that well at the time. I thought he was going to be like, oh no, like I'm going to leave the room. And he was like, oh no, like really, is that going to happen this week? And that's interesting. Well, let's keep an eye out on. And yeah, so it was very engaging and interesting to see that there is parallels with the Vedic astrology and the real world, like in politics, even a couple months ago, and but then also internally, and you don't have to like give everything else up and focus only on that. You can, but you can see it as a guide and see like parallels, right? And yeah, it's a beautiful tool that you can use to get to know yourself better and your environment, and to relate maybe on a deeper level as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just there's so many things in my first reading that just stood out of like, how does he know this? Like, and it's, once you get to understand astrology, it's pretty clear. And things like, before that, in the US here in 2021, and the insurrection thing that happened in the beginning of January, like I got a lot of messages from people of like, you just said this was going to happen. It's like, that's the kind of stuff you can just look through history and you see the patterns, and it's like, okay, there's going to be a revolution happening.
Yeah.
So it's, in a way, it's simpler. And from the Vedic perspective in India, like they often think of time in very long stretches. In the US, we often think of time in very short stretches of like, what about now? What am I going to do today? What's the news today? But often the Vedic perspective is thousands of years of like, we're going to reincarnate and come back. And, I don't think you have to believe anything or follow any particular path to understand astrology and learn from it, or yoga. But yeah, that's the sort of Vedic perspective of like, there's just cycles of time playing out. There's patterns.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're all just animals, I like to say. And we go with the flow at times, and we react to things that are happening in the world, just because that energy is right there, and we feel like we have to awaken now. We have to have a revolution because the old is not serving us anymore. And I can totally see, it's like waves, like the ocean, coming back and forth. And so we're coming to an end here. Your story is incredibly powerful. In a nutshell, I would say you chose to not live a life as a victim. You chose to take what you had and leave it behind and find something new and find yourself. So this in and of itself is so inspiring already. Is there any message you would like to send out to mainly men, but also women listening out there who are still maybe stuck in a situation they don't want to be in, or still feel like a victim?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough. Like, I remember having a job I really didn't want to be at. There was a moment that stood out where, we were working overtime, like 60 hours, 70 hours a week at this window factory that I worked at. And all I could think was, I just want to save up money and get out of this job. And me and my close friend, I had a few friends who worked there actually. And we were all just like, we just want to save up money and quit because it was so stressful and so difficult. And we were carpooling home one morning. So we worked the night shift. It's like 7 a.m. And our leader, our like shift leader guy or manager, came out in front of our car, like jokingly, like we were only going like 2 miles an hour, but he came out in front of our car, like jokingly, like with his hands up. He's like, just kill me now. He's just like, we were all stressed out. We all wanted to get out of this situation of it's not where we wanted to be. And that just stood out to me. It was just like, I just need to just quit already. And I didn't really have a good plan at that point. And it was the best income I'd made at that point for sure. So it's scary. It's uncertain. It's unnerving to leave what is safe and familiar and what you're already in. But that feeling is there for a reason. It's like, you can't ignore those feelings. As men, I think we're often trained to just sort of not feel. And it's like whatever, I can handle anything. We want to be impervious to pain, essentially. And that's kind of what we admire in like action heroes or athletes. Like, wow, like, nothing can stop them. Like MMA, like they can just get knocked down and get back up. And that's sort of a masculine strength. But when it comes to emotions and those little messages of like, this has got to change, this is out of alignment, like we've got to listen to those, I think. Otherwise we continue to suffer, and like, we're ultimately going to create a world where that's sort of normalized, and maybe you have a wife or family or kids or whatever, and they see you suffering and struggling and being something you don't want to be. And that creates more of that sort of energy all around you, and it reinforces it. So ultimately, I think it's important to just trust those intuitions and take little actions, maybe sometimes big actions, but to know that ultimately, if you zoom out, we're just here for a very short time, and we might as well make the most of it while we're here, and reach out to people who have done what you want to do. Right? The only reason I'm a yoga teacher now is because I had so many good teachers myself. The only reason I'm an astrologer now is because I had so many good astrology teachers. And the only reason I have any success in my business because I've had so many good teachers. And I have a lot of great men in my life in the Mankind Project, and just who I've met over the years and other stuff. So that's a great program that any guy can get involved in, usually anywhere in the world. And but just find people who are doing what you want to be doing, and eventually you'll be doing that too. It's not going to be immediate, but it will happen if you just keep being around those people and keep listening to your intuition.
Mm-hmm. Very beautiful closing words. And as soon as you decide to shine your own light and be truly yourself, you will attract also people who see you and who want to support you and lift you up. And it's just incredible. Like, it's scary at the beginning, but they will find you if you're not scared anymore of who you are. And yeah, Jeremy, thank you so much for your time. I know you just got limited time here, and I'm so grateful that you made the time to be on my podcast here. Yeah, incredible what we just created. I'm very, very happy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor.
Yeah, if you have any questions, if you got curious about Jeremy's podcast, please reach out to him or just check it out on Apple Podcast or Anchor or wherever you can find podcasts. And yeah, you know where you can find me. Thanks for listening, and until very soon again. Bye-bye.